So last time we jumped into chapter 8 and we talked about how God is faithful to fulfill his covenants and we can place our faith in his faithfulness. And then we also talked about how the flood transformed the earth and that because of sin, literally how the earth functions after that was changed and how important it is that we make good choices because we can change generations. So this week we will finish out chapter 8 focusing on what happened as the flood was subsiding. And in Genesis chapter 8 and verse 6, it says, "At the end of another 40 days, Noah opened a window of the ark, which he had made." Now, this seems kind of insignificant and I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but I find it's very interesting how God gave Noah the plans for the ark and made it perfectly. You know, imagine there really hadn't been a boat like this built before. How would Noah know how to keep it from leaking, or how to make the window that was functional, or how to get ventilation, but yet keep out the rain? You know, these are things that always make me just get a little excited that how important God makes every little detail. And so we know that we read earlier that God gave these specific directions to Noah, how to build the ark, and that he followed them to a T. But I love this. In the footnotes of my Bible, it talks about how perfectly God is, that he had told Noah how to make this boat with nothing lacking to keep it well suited for what was required of it. In my footnotes, it also mentions that in 1609 at Hoorn in Holland, a Mennonite by the name of P. Jansen produced a vessel after the pattern of the ark, only smaller, whereby he proved it was well adapted for floating and would carry a cargo greater by 1/3 than any other form of like cubical content. So in other words, it does better than anything they had at that time. And his findings that were actually following the directions in Genesis revolutionized shipbuilding. Actually, they used this as the pattern. And by 1900, every large vessel was inclined to the proportions, obviously not same size, but the proportions of Noah's Ark. You know, later on, they changed some of it because speed became an important factor, and so they made the boats longer. But it's so interesting to me as I study the word that, you know, something in the Bible like a boat, on how to make a boat, directions on how to make a boat, actually are valid. And so I just love how this affirms the validity of the Bible, but also the validity of our God who gives these directions. You know, only he could do something so perfectly that for generations, it's actually what works. So I think that's so cool. But the most important part of chapter 8 I want to point out is in verses 7 through 12. Here we find that Noah first sends out a raven. And in verse 7, it says that the raven didn't return and it kept going to and fro until the waters were eventually dried up. Well, he tries again 7 days later with a dove this time, and it came back to the boat, signifying that the earth was not yet habitable. And then he repeats this 7 days later, and the dove brings back a fresh olive leaf, showing that some places of land are almost ready for habitation. And so he repeats another 7 days later, it's a lot of 7 days, and the dove doesn't return. And so this is a sign to him that the earth has dried out and the time will be coming for he and his family to get off the boat. The dove brought hope. Now, something very interesting about this portion of scripture is that Noah first sent a raven. However, if you know anything about birds, a raven is a scavenger. So a raven would have no problem landing on a floating dead carcass and resting there, or even eating a portion of it. A raven represents what it looks like when we return to our sin. The floating carcasses and the death that would have been floating on the waters where the remnants of the sin and evil world which God had wiped away in the flood, the raven was satisfied to return to the fallen world. So the raven didn't come back. He was satisfied finding gross things and eating gross things and living on things. But the dove, who is not a scavenger, would not be satisfied to land on a carcass or eat dead things. It wouldn't land until something with life had taken form. And it wouldn't be satisfied to return to the fallen and dead things that were lurking. So I think this is so cool because we can learn from the raven and the dove. Sometimes in life we can be tempted to return to our old former selves, to our old sin nature. It may seem like a solid place to land for the time being, or it'll work for now, but God didn't intend for us to settle for death and decay. He intended for us to have life and life abundantly. In John 10:10, it says, "The thief comes not to steal and kill and destroy. I come that they may have life and that they may have it more abundantly. You see, God intends for us to live in the amazing world he created for us through what Jesus did for us on the cross. He doesn't want us to be like the raven, choosing willfully to return to the decay of the sinful world that God was trying to get rid of. Instead, he wants us to be like the dove that isn't satisfied until they find the abundant and healthy life that God has created for us. So today, let's remind ourselves to be like the dove that is ever searching for God's best and get rid of the raven mentality that settles for the death and decay of the world. And next week, we'll finish our last part of chapter 8 and move into chapter 9, studying how God made a covenant with Noah and with us forever.